Oh, and I give everyone a 10 for trying their best.
No, come on.
This isn't school sport day.
Don't be facetious. I don't give 10s out like candy. From Autosport Magazine and Autosport.com, I'm Kevin Turner, and this is the Autosport Podcast. Well, hello and welcome back to the Autosport F1 Podcast. And this episode, we will be discussing the United States Grand Prix, where reigning world champion Max Verstappen cruised to his fifth win of the season. Lando Norris eventually overcame Charles Leclerc to finish second, while championship leader Oscar Piastri only managed to come home fifth. It was Verstappen's second win of the weekend after taking the honours of the sprint race on Saturday, and that's propelled him into title contention. So joining me to discuss the key points from the weekend are two of our F1 team. First of all, from America, he's just got up, I think, Stuart Codling. Stuart, how are you doing?
I'm just waiting for the first coffee of the day to kick in, Kev. It was quite a late finish owing to tape gate, so... It's just my birthday today, so I'm going to celebrate by... I might eat some more
happy
red
birthday.
meat.
I'm sorry, I didn't realise, you see.
Yeah, thank you. 21 again. Yeah, I'm going to eat some more cow today. I don't think there's a single cut of cow I've not eaten since being in Texas. I'm going to explore the rest of it and maybe have a little encore tour.
Well, I don't really know what to say to that, but I will introduce our second guest, which is Jake Boxall-Legge. Jake, how are you doing? How did you see the weekend from afar?
I thought it was interesting. I think, also I should say happy birthday, Codders. I should begin with that first. I think it was an interesting weekend. It wasn't necessarily the greatest race, but now we're in a position where it set us up for what could be a really interesting final five races, because we've got a title battle that probably 3 or 4 races ago we didn't necessarily expect. Well, before we get into the sort of the detail of it, let's just have a quick look at the two races in our race report. In the sprint race, Max Verstappen took the win from pole, holding off a very aggressive George Russell in the early stages, and Carlos Sainz in third place for Williams. The race was chaotic right from the start, with both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri involved in a first corner shunt that we will definitely come back to later on. A second incident near the end involving, well, it's frankly a ridiculous move from Lance Stroll, wasn't it, on Esteban Ocon, brought the safety car out, so that's how the race finished, which is a bit of an anticlimax. But of course, that result in itself tightened up the championship thanks to McLaren's double retirement. So Jake, what was your main takeaway from the sprint race? Obviously, taking away the hindsight that you've now got from the Grand Prix itself, what was your kind of thoughts after Saturday's race?
Well, I remember looking into it because every time we get a sprint race, it's a bit difficult to kind of read into the pace of the weekend, because you know that they're going to set up pretty, let's say, dramatically for that race, knowing that it's a very, very bumpy circuit, Austin. So you're going to take a little bit of license with the skid blocks, in particular after that double disqualification in 2023 for Leclerc and for Hamilton. So we saw the cars running quite low. And so you saw a certain order, Nico Hülkenberg up there.
So it didn't last very long in the race, though, sadly.
No, no, it didn't, because you have this interesting uphill first corner where it seems to have been designed to kind of fan the cars out and then funnel them back into order. It's almost like it's been designed to be a bit of an accident generator. And then you end up with a situation where you've got 4 cars wide, essentially, and there's just not enough track for all of them.
Now, Stuart, apart from the McLaren Turn 1 fiasco, I think the other talking point from the race was probably George Russell's attempt on Max Verstappen, when he kind of felt, I suspect, that he was sort of now or never, given the tyre problems that Mercedes has, as Jake has already mentioned. So what did you make of Russell's move to try and get the lead from Verstappen that actually ended with both of them going off the road?
I applaud it. It's now or never is the phrasing I used in the press conference afterwards to George, because I said, to paraphrase Elvis, what made you think it was now or never? Because I kind of thought, let's ask a question. There must have been other laps. Why then? And yeah, it was sort of, tyre situation. So he felt that there wasn't going to be any other window, so he might as well send it. And yeah, I applaud him. It was just racing and nobody got hurt. And I think it's probably better that we have things like that than people just toddling around processionally, as we saw for quite a lot of Sunday afternoon.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute. I mean, I was a bit torn on it because it was pretty bold, pretty aggressive, and obviously Max Verstappen came over the radio to have a moan about it. But then I thought, but it's exactly the sort of move that he's been doing for the last 6, 7 or 8 years. So I kind of landed with the, well, you know, live by the sword, die by the sword. So Max, if you're going to drive like that, then I would suggest that it's probably, you've got to expect somebody else to. But I think it's a statement of intent from Russell, isn't it? I think we know when he gets a championship contending car, Verstappen will know about it, and I'm sure Max knows that as well.
There's this whole myth that Russell and Verstappen hate one another and don't talk to one another, but kind of off camera in that press conference, while Carlos was getting a little bit of limelight and love from the host and the various people asking questions, Max and George were quietly having a little chat. And I think Max is a sort of guy, he is a bully on track, and I think he respects you. He might not say it when he's talking to his engineer and trying to lobby for a penalty, but I think he respects you more if you try something.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like the Ayrton Senna and Nigel Mansell dynamic to me, but...
you know, the day Max Verstappen ends a race and says, "Oh, I lost second, third, fourth, and fifth gear and had to push the car around fast by 10 laps," I'd love to see that.
I think you saw that with Lando last year as well. There was sort of a couple of, I'm not going to say weak-willed moves, but it just wasn't. You've got to race Max pretty hard, right, to make an impact. And George had one opportunity, as he said, and I can confirm, watching the press conference, Codders did phrase his question like that. It was going to be difficult if he was ever going to make it work, and even if he did overtake him, you know, how long would that have lasted? But you know, you've got to take the opportunities where they are. Otherwise, P2 was a good upgrade in that sprint race because of the carnage, as it were, ahead of him.
Yeah, taking opportunities is quite a good segue into the Grand Prix itself, because while Max Verstappen dominated, pretty much leading from start to finish, Charles Leclerc, on an alternative strategy, attacking first lap, essentially ruined it in terms of a lead race, because he then kept Lando Norris behind him for most of the race, even though the McLaren was faster and had to overtake the Ferrari twice. So Norris did end up second, only overcoming the Ferrari right in the last few laps. And Oscar Piastri, as you said before, the championship leader coming in only fifth, meaning his buffer is now significantly smaller than it was. So I guess the obvious question, Stuart, is Max Verstappen now in the 2025 F1 title fight?
I think I wrote something along those lines after the sprint race, because obviously everyone was getting very excited about him taking an 8-point net gain. But at that point, he was still 55 points behind Piastri, 33 points behind Norris. So I pointed out at that juncture that even if Max won every single sprint and Grand Prix until the end of the year, and Piastri finished second, then Piastri would still be the champion by, I think, about 11 points, maybe. So that was then, but this is now. A minor hit for ABC in the early 80s, I believe. If this carries on and Max keeps winning, or even just scores a few second places, and the McLarens make a bit of a Horlicks of it, as they did this weekend, let's face it, it is entirely possible now, because McLaren seem to be slightly confused by what's going on. The drivers seem to be manifesting the pressure. And what seems most peculiar to me of all is that Piastri is the one who's crumbling a little bit, because he's the guy who's kind of like the new Iceman, isn't he? And we've seen this year he's been totally unflappable for most races. He's not always been as quick as Norris straight out of the gate, but he builds through a weekend, and sometimes on Sundays he's been faster, he's delivered the better results. But now we're not seeing that, and even McLaren team principal Andrea Stella said during his briefing over the weekend that certainly this weekend, Oscar hasn't been able to do that sort of building thing. He's sort of been stuck, and maybe partly the failure to finish in the sprint race was a cause of that, because that's a whole load of data that McLaren then didn't get. So it kind of compounded through the weekend, made it more difficult for them in qualifying, and then more difficult for them in the race.
Well, let's get into that with our debrief section. So, Jake, how much of Lando Norris and McLaren losing the race was down to the time lost, as Stuart has already said, about not having the track time from the sprint race. How much of it was Charles Leclerc being incredible and choosing the soft tyre at the start, and how much of it was, dare we say, Lando Norris perhaps not being as aggressive against the Ferrari as George Russell had been against Verstappen the day before?
This is going to sound very cliched. This is going to be a combination of all of them. But I think the sprint race lack of track time, that directly impacted the starting strategy. So this was something that Leclerc pointed out to Norris after the race. He was surprised that he didn't see Norris starting on the softs as well. Now, the reason they didn't do that was because McLaren hadn't really had much time with any of the tyres. The only real long distance running it had done was on the hards in FP1. So because you don't know how long the softs are going to last, Pirelli promising a two-stop strategy that never really ended up happening. And their suggestion was that the only way the one-stop was really going to work was unless you really managed or you took the hards. But the thing is, nobody wanted to take the hard tyre because it was about a second a lap slower than the medium. For Norris at that point, it's a big risk to start on the softs, isn't it?
Is that a McLaren problem? Too conservative, like all season, conservative strategy, conservative sharing it between the drivers. Do they need to? Do you think we're getting to the point where they do need to actually take a bit more of a risk?
I think there's occasions where they've been guilty of that. I think that in this situation, it was necessary for them to be conservative because, again, they had nothing to fall back on. I think there are points this season where they have tried to develop a car that's so dominant in a way that they don't have to worry about that stuff. That's taken out of their hands because they can just do their own thing and get to the end and likely win. But now they're not in a position where they can do that now. And I think this will indirectly be a bit of a wake-up call in that front.
I did my column this week for Autosport subscribers was sort of drawing a few parallels between this season and 2009, 2010 to a lesser extent, where a leader saw their lead kind of threatened, and in the case of Fernando Alonso in 2010, overturned just as the checkered flag was in sight. And there are a few parallels with 2009, not just tech intrigue, drivers not quite getting along in the lead car, but also a situation where you have the ultimate champion won, 6 out of the first 7 races, and then barely saw the podium again over the rest of the season and was fighting a desperate rearguard action against a Red Bull driver. So there are some sort of interesting parallels there. I suppose with 2025, it's very easy for us to sit here and say McLaren should grow a pair and be a bit more bold, but the differences at the front are so marginal now that 2 or 3 tenths can be the difference between pole position and has been between 8th or 9th on the grid. So it's difficult to be bold when you're in that environment and there's such fine margins.
Well, let's talk about someone who was bold, and that was Ferrari and Charles Leclerc. Now, we've criticised them over the years, maybe not so much recently, actually, that they've been a bit off the pace with strategy. They've not done the right things. But from where I was sitting, Charles Leclerc and Ferrari absolutely maximised the car they had. They didn't. I think it was the 3rd quickest car, and they spent most of the time running in 2nd place. So, I mean, is there anything that Leclerc or Ferrari could have done to get a better result?
I don't think so. There was no strategy that Pirelli could see where you started on the softs and then went to the middle of the race and then went on to the mediums. You know, we're used to Pirelli's strategic prognostications having a little touch of fiction, rose-tinted glasses, wishful thinking, whatever colour you want to put on it. Leclerc literally overturned that. The one thing that was proved right, I think, was Pirelli said that it would be quite silly to start on the hards because you lock yourself into a very, very long stint on a slower tyre. And if the hard was going to be used, it would be at the end on a medium hard strategy. Albon, as soon as he could, after starting on those hards, said, had enough of this. Leclerc, I think, was brilliant. I'm not sure he was ever going to get past Max at turn 1. That was asking a little bit too much.
Well, even he kind of hinted at that, didn't he? When he was interviewed afterwards, like, we're going to try and get clean air with the soft tyre, but we did have 2 cars ahead of us, meaning, and I didn't think that was going to work, but at least we got up to 2nd.
Yeah, he made a very, very unlikely strategy last, and that's just the genius of Leclerc, isn't it? People think of him as just being a guy who's absolutely mega fast and occasionally stacks it in qualifying because he gets so excited. But actually, this weekend's been Leclerc at his best. And it wasn't just in the nailing the start, it was keeping Norris in a faster car behind him for so long, and then just keeping those tyres alive until he could get to that point in the race where he could go to the mediums. I think this has been a high risk strategy for Ferrari, and it was high reward because Leclerc's so brilliant.
Well, that raises the question, Jake, before we leave that subject behind. With hindsight, do you think McLaren should have started Norris on the soft? Would that have given them a better chance to have a go at Verstappen?
Yeah, absolutely, because then he would have matched what Leclerc did. I think, Norris's start wasn't bad. In the past, Norris has had some pretty awful starts, and I don't think his positioning off the line is very good. He gets a little bit too caught up following the leader, trying to sort of predict what the leader does, and he does tend to forget about the cars around him, and so he ends up at a point where he gets boxed in, and we saw that at Hungary this year as well. Off the line, it's not been too much of an issue, and actually in this one...
Well, his reaction times are always among the best, aren't they? In fact, his reaction times are often better than Verstappen's when they show the graphic at the start of the races. It's always the bit after that, as you say, where it seems to him not quite find that right space.
Yeah, exactly. And then Leclerc sort of pushed him off, forced him to respond a little bit, and then, collected the inside line for turn one, and then switched back and got the drive out of the corner, which is what you wanted in that situation. But that's not to take away anything from Leclerc at all. I think Leclerc did an absolutely stunning job in defence.
Yeah, and finally, Stuart, you mentioned it earlier on. What the hell is Stickergate? You better outline that for us.
So, yes, immediately after the race, the stewards sent out via the document system a notification that they were investigating a Red Bull team member for violation of the regulations for not obeying the instructions of a relevant official. So there's a little bit of what on earth is going on here. And it turned out after the race that what had happened was that a Red Bull mechanic or crew member had tried to go back onto the track after the grid had been cleared as the formation lap began, while the marshals were trying to close this gate, and then didn't obey them when they said, "Oi, what are you doing? Get out." So what happens generally at the start of Grand Prix is when the pre-grid is happening, the McLaren mechanic position Lando Norris in his grid box right at the front, where it's really, really tricky for him to see the markings from the cockpit. And they put a bit of what's known in the trade as gaffer tape on the pit wall or somewhere near him in his peripheral vision, so he can turn his head to the side as he's pulling into his box and just line up with that. And what this Red Bull mechanic was trying to do was remove that vertical strip of gaffer tape. So there is nothing in the rules to say that you can't put markings around the track to perform that function. There's nothing in the rules to say that if someone else has put a marker down, you can't tear it off again. So the offence was that the guy was trying to enter the track when he shouldn't. Go to the Autosport website and see the story. Our Dutch colleague Ronald had a picture looking across from the grid, and you can see the strip of tape. It's just by the S in the MSC Cruises logo by the gate. So, yeah, it's a little bit of something and nothing. It's a bit of kind of gamesmanship. It's an insight into the little mind games the teams play with one another.
No, I just think it's rubbish, honestly. I know there's gamesmanship and it's not against the rules, but come on, Red Bull. I know there's pushing the limits to things, but that for me, that's just all, just come on.
It's slightly petty.
I was hoping that we'd seen the end of that sort of thing after Christian Horner left, but anyway, should we move swiftly on? I think that's enough.
Please, lads.
Well, let's go into rating the drivers. Jake's done the hard work, actually looking at the onboards and the data and all the rest of it. So let's get into, and this is a weekend score. So Jake, let's go. First of all, Max Verstappen. What for him out of 10?
So I did give him a 10 for this weekend. I've never been... I think when I started doing ratings particularly, I was never particularly keen on giving 10s, as you probably know, because I kind of thought, well, that's got to be for the generational drives, hasn't it? But I think actually on the scale it works, because I don't think there was anything more over the weekend that Max could have done. Well, he missed the fastest lap, but I'm not going to deduct a point for that.
Damn it! Yeah, you're quite literally not going to lose a point for that, are you? Yeah. Stuart.
I agree. I don't think there's anything other than 10 you can give to Max's performance this weekend. He did everything right. I think we're getting into a situation where we are moving away from the narrative of Max out driving a crappy car, because that's a myth anyway. The car has a certain amount of pace in it. It's just a case of whether you can get there.
Yeah, as Jake said, it was flawless, wasn't it? So, 2 poles, 2 fine starts, controlled the races. So don't think we can have too much controversy there. So second place, Lando Norris. What did you give him, Jake?
Lando got an 8 from me this week. I thought strong race. Probably missed the mark a little bit in qualifying. I think missed a little bit of performance there. Didn't get an opportunity to show what he could do in the sprint. So a little bit of almost a kind of deduction, not really a deduction as such, but I don't think you can really put him any higher, because we just couldn't really show what he could do in that race.
Stuart?
I'm wobbling between a 7 and an 8, because I kind of thought the car did have the pace to pass Leclerc, and he made slightly heavy weather of overtaking Charles, and he was telegraphing what he was doing too far in advance, and he needs to add a little bit of intrigue to his overtaking manoeuvres, because he's kind of too predictable.
Charles Leclerc in third. Jake?
9 this week, Kev. I gave him a slight deduction, just simply because on that final overtake, I don't think he fought that one hard enough. So let's call that half a mark, and then the other half was just a spin in Q3, which I think was very avoidable and very nearly killed off his session. Actually ended up recovering anyway, but that was very avoidable, a little bit amateurish.
Stuart?
Can I give him 9.5?
Oh, into halves. I mean, traditionally, I suppose we did used to do halves, didn't we?
Let's do halves again, because apart from that spin, for me, perfection.
I would have given him 10, because I think that spin didn't really make any difference to the weekend result. I appreciate it's not perfect, and that's probably what offends
a
Jake
spin
slightly.
is still imperfection, Kev.
I would suggest that it's better to be crashing and practicing qualifying than the race. But I do take your point, but I would have given him 10 for that one.
Oh, and I give everyone a 10 for trying their best.
No, come on.
This isn't
Don't be
school
facetious.
sports day.
Don't be facetious. I don't give 10s out like candy, but you show me someone else who maximised their car more than Charles Leclerc. And I don't think even Verstappen was pushed as hard as Leclerc had to in that race. So I would give them both 10. But anyway, so Lewis Hamilton, 4th.
I gave him an 8, actually, because, again, it didn't have to shine of the first drive, but this is what Fred Vasseur called an actual complete drive from Hamilton this weekend. No real mistakes. Outqualified Leclerc in the sprint and outperformed him as well. So I think on balance, it's got to be an 8 for the weekend.
Stuart?
7.
Ooh.
Because purely on the grounds that someone of his quality shouldn't be finishing, what was it at the end, 12 seconds behind his teammate.
Yeah, can see that. Well, on that note, 5th place, Oscar Piastri.
So I've given him a 6 for this one, which isn't a bad score, I don't think. Just off Norris all weekend. Again, lacked the track time in the sprint race. I didn't really want to blame him for the turn 1 incident. It's just a case of 4 and 1 don't go. But ultimately, through the race, there was a point where it looked like Russell was catching him up, so he just managed to dig out a little bit more pace to keep him behind. Really struggled with the wind, really struggled with the setup. Again, I think a legacy of having very little track time.
Stuart?
4.
Oh, well, that's the biggest discrepancy we've had thus far. I must admit, I was hovering around a 5, so as an average. So go on, explain the 4.
5 is an average for me, and Piastri was below average, well below what we've come to expect from him. Quite frankly, I've already argued my case over that with McLaren's new head of PR over the weekend, who sort of hauled me in with the shepherd's crook after the Andrea Stella briefing. I went, Stuart, come here. Yeah. He is Italian. And he was trying to blame Hulkenberg for the whole thing. I know Zach Brown rode back on it, but Andrea Stella still kept saying that, people with more experience should be more prudent. And my take on that attitude is that it's a slight case of how dare you be there. And I was the same with Verstappen in Singapore when he was moaning about Norris, who was 20 miles up the road in qualifying. How dare you even be in the same circuit as me? I thought Piastri at turn 1 did a karting style cutback, which works at other circuits, but not at COTA. And I think Hülkenberg was perfectly entitled to be there, and Piastri was the one who was imprudent. So, yeah, that's a hill I'm going to die on for.
Well, you've totally stolen my ranting point for later, but I'm sure we can work around that. So that's
yeah, we can rant at pleasure.
We can, right? Okay. Well, let's go on to George Russell in our ratings. Jake,
he got an 8 from me. I thought for brevity, sprint race again, gave it a good go. Really strong sprint race, and I think he just pretty much got the most out of it, to be honest with you. So I felt like an 8 was fair.
I agree. Good race, solid. I was disappointed that he wasn't a bit feistier in the Grand Prix, and then when he was immediately out of the car, he started moaning about the tyres to one of the TV stations. But then I think he sort of wound his neck in a little bit and was a little bit more generous about things. I think there wasn't much more he could have done.
So in 7th place, an improvement in form really. Yuki Tsunoda. Jake?
I gave him a 6 for this one. I wasn't sure if I was being too harsh or too kind, because I thought, first of all, result better than usual, but there were some really ropey bits as well. And I think balancing the two together, really good starts, but yeah, some questionable antics out there.
5. Very, very average, poor in qualifying, did well at turn 1 in a sprint, took the Esteban Ocon Hungary 2000 express lane. Apart from that, raced okay, but when you consider that the other Red Bull driver won everything and got a 10.
Indeed. So then he's just desserts on Saturday, but Nico Hülkenberg for Sauber. Jake?
8 for this one. Again, sprint race qualifying was excellent. Didn't qualify quite so well for the Grand Prix, but made up for it in the race. Did get a little bit of fortune with Sainz and Antonelli coming together, but I thought it was a really well worked race. And points for Sauber, his first in Silverstone.
Stu, you going to disagree with that?
No, I'll give him an 8. Really solid performance. And, to nuance my argument about turn 1 of the sprint, I don't think he was entirely blameless, but I don't think he deserved to have all the blame apportioned onto him. Great in qualifying, very solid race with a car that's not brilliant. And look at where his teammate finished.
Yeah, nice to see him score the first point since that podium British Grand Prix. And 18th is the answer to that question about where did Bortoletto finish. Right, so then we'll round out the top 10. So 9th, Ollie Behrman.
That was a 7 for this weekend. I think he deserved more points, actually, to be honest with you. I think, again, one of the questionable moves I was talking about, Yuki really sort of brake checked him at one point, cost him 2 positions.
Was he not also going for a gap that wasn't really there, though?
I think I've seen enough passes in that corner to sort of feel like it was on, almost, just about.
Fair enough. What do you reckon, Stuart?
I'm like Natalie Imbruglia, I'm quite torn, because my instinct was to give him a 6, because it was quite a scrappy weekend. And, you would say it was an average weekend. You'd give him 5, lift it a little bit for getting a good result and being a bit feisty. Where he launched on Tsunoda was just one of those corners where it's very easy for the other guy to just wander across. And as you know, the thing I can't abide in any discourse on motor racing is the use of that old Ayrton Senna quote as a mic drop. If you no longer go for a gap, then you are no longer a racing driver. My variant on that is, if you go for a gap that's barely there and always going to close, then you're a bit of an asshat, really, then, aren't you?
Yeah, I must admit, I have my reservations about that quote as well, which is way overused and wasn't entirely correct when he said it. But anyway, there we go.
Yeah.
Right, let's round out the driver ratings with 10th place, which is Fernando Alonso. If you would like to have a look at the full ratings, take a look at autosport.com for Jake's full ratings. So, Jake, what did you give Fernando?
This was another seven. I promise they're not all sixes and sevens, but I thought the Aston Martin wasn't a particularly strong car at all. So for him to get a point with that, I think is a really good reward.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, afterwards, Fernando said the Aston Martin is now, the 9th best car. So obviously this was the best 10th place ever.
Fair enough. Well, that's our top 10 ratings. So we're going to finish with On the Limiter, which is where we get to have a bit of a rant about things that have particularly annoyed us, and I get to choose this and do a little bit of talking, and the guys can disagree with me or not. The thing that really annoyed me was about the Turn 1 incident. That it was more McLaren's response to it rather than the incident itself. The incident itself, to me, was a racing incident at best, and at worst was, as Stuart has already said, Oscar Piastri trying to cut underneath Lando Norris, which would have been a perfectly legitimate move if it was in the middle of the race and there was just those two cars there. But it was a little bit like Oscar forgot that there were 17 cars behind. And I thought Zak Brown criticising the other drivers and calling them amateur was, when you're talking about two of the most experienced F1 drivers in history, with Fernando Alonso on the on the left-hand side and Nico Hülkenberg in the middle. So, yeah, and they were going to analyse it after the race, after the weekend. What's there to analyse? It was a racing incident triggered by Piastri making an understandable but risky move that perhaps he shouldn't have done. So that would have been the end of the analysis for me. I don't think they need to be spending hours and hours in a debrief on that one, to be honest. Stuart, I know you agree with me because you basically had the same rant during the driver rating. So Jake, are you going to step out of line, or am I all right to be on the limiter about the over-analysis and harsh criticism from McLaren about Hülkenberg and Alonso?
I think it's weird because it begs a larger question about McLaren, doesn't it? It just sort of feels like everything is very careful. Everything is very structured. And there's this rigidity there. And when situations happen that's outside of their control, they sort of have to think, well, that just happened. What does that mean? In Formula One, as Murray Walker always said, Formula One is if backwards, and it's one of the biggest sort of.
It's not. It's one F backwards.
But right,
it's just not.
The point is,
sorry,
it is, and I'll explain why. So it's hugely affected by variance, and things just happen on the track, and you can't account for them. And sometimes you've got to take your punches. Sometimes you've got to take your medicine. Just say, that happened. Right, let's move on. That's likely not going to happen again. But there seems to be this sort of thing where I'm imagining where they do it frame by frame and sit the two drivers in front of it and go, okay, well, you were here and you needed to be 2 millimeters over to the right to make that happen. Formula One's just dynamic and these things happen. You're not thinking in the moment, I need to be 2 millimeters to the other way. You're not thinking, you're just sensing opportunities, you're going for it, and it's highly instinctive.
Yeah, it's not a dress rehearsal for a play where the director says, no, hang on, stand over there, darling, and emote a little bit more. There's so many more moving parts.
Yeah, I think we do need to accept that it's a racing incident sometimes, don't we?
Sometimes discretion's the better part of valor. Yes, in that situation, McLaren's just got to literally say, right, okay, that happened, deal with it. Let's actually focus on sorting our car out, because Red Bull's found something and they've not really responded, and just sort of going, well, there's tracks that we'll be better at. I don't see where that's going to come from anymore. I'm no longer convinced that, unless something happens, that they can go away and dominate and win a race this season. I don't think they can do that anymore. So there needs to be a bit of a rethink, I think.
I think there's an element of Andrea Stella being very clever and gifted engineer, very good team leader. And I'm going to say a but here. And he seems to think that every aspect of a race can be micromanaged in some way, shape or form. And it just can't be, because as Jake says, it's a dynamic, constantly evolving situation. And I just think the whole business of saying that more experienced drivers should drive with more prudence is spurious cant. It was ridiculous to blame it on more experienced drivers, when I would say if we were going to apportion any percentage of responsibility for that shunt, it's got to be somewhere along the lines of 40 to 50% Piastri. So he was lucky not to get a penalty for that, in my opinion. And McLaren's attitude just smacks of entitlement and how dare you be that.
Well, I think we're all on roughly the same page with that one. So what do you think? What, listeners, do you think we're being a bit harsh on McLaren? Do you think Hülkenberg or Alonso were to blame for that crash? Let us know. Otherwise, thanks very much for joining us for this episode of the Autosport F1 podcast. We'll be back after the Mexican Grand Prix. From Stuart Codling, Jake Boxall-Legge and me, Kevin Turner, it's goodbye for now.